It's just after midnight, and you know what that means. You're listening to The Witching Hour on Channel X. October 20th, 11 days till Halloween. I brought in a couple fellow horror hounds today to discuss a few matters of grave importance. One of them being the slashtacular film series known as Friday the 13th. But first, October 20th is also the birthday of one of the most important figures in the entire history of horror. On this day, October 20th, 1882, Mr. Bela Lugosi was welcomed into this world in Lugos, Hungary. Of course, most know him as the original Dracula from director Todd Browning's 1931 adaptation of the Bram Stoker novel of the same name. There have been many actors in the role of Dracula since then, and in fact, many of them played the character in more films than Lugosi did. However, when you mention the name Dracula, Christopher Lee is not the name that comes up first, nor any of the others. The name and face that everybody thinks of as soon as you say that word is Bela Lugosi. Now let's bring in our guests. Welcome back, Nehring.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going all right. Just getting ready for the birthday celebration for Lugosi here.
Are you ready to pull the string? Pull the string!
Karloff, don't mention that name in front of me. And now, appearing for the very first time on the show, we have Tony. Welcome to hell, Tony.
Good evening. How is everybody doing tonight?
I'm all right. How are you?
Oh, hanging in there.
That's good to hear. Say, aren't you going to have any wine, Tony?
I never drink wine.
I was hoping you'd know that line. That's kind of a shot in the dark there. Nehring, when someone says the name Bela Lugosi in front of you, what's the first thing you think of?
The children of the night.
Of course.
What music they make.
Now, I take it you're a fan of the 1931 movie Dracula?
Big time fan. He is my favorite Universal monster.
And you know what I was thinking of today while getting ready for this? We met a cast member from that movie.
We did.
I was there.
We were very fortunate back in the fall of 2013 to meet Carla Laemmle, niece of the founder of Universal Studios, Carl Laemmle. And Ms. Laemmle has the very first line of spoken dialogue in a horror talkie in the very beginning of Dracula. And she, at the time we met her, was the only surviving cast member.
One of my best autograph gets.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, out of the three of us, I'm the only guy who isn't normally into autographs. But when I was there with you guys, and I actually didn't even realize who she was until it was probably Nehring who mentioned, well, this is Carla Laemmle. She was in the original Dracula. I'm like, oh my God. So I immediately, started checking out the situation, and I ended up getting an autograph myself. And with her approval, I videotaped her signing the autograph, which to me, it's much more cool than the autograph itself. I actually have video of her filling it out, which was cool.
It might be her very last appearance on screen, because we lost her about 7 months later.
I was going to say it was really close after that she did pass, wasn't it?
Yeah, I want to say June of 2014, but don't hold me to that.
Yeah, I do remember it was in 2014 because it was October of 2013 that we met her, and yep. I know it was like somewhere around 6 months or so later that I heard she died. Tony, what does the name Bela Lugosi mean when you hear it?
Obviously, the fog, the three brides,
yes.
The gothic atmosphere of that movie. And for me, being a fan of the Wolfman, the guy that turned Lon Chaney Jr. into the Wolfman.
One thing I thought was interesting, this is kind of out of nowhere, but I remember seeing an article a while back that Bela Lugosi was paid a lot less than the guy who played Jonathan Harker.
I had not heard that, but it wouldn't shock me because Dwight Fry, the guy who played Harker, or Renfield, I should say, was at that time an established character actor. So just by virtue of his experience, he may have commanded a higher fee. Also, I would point out that I think, and don't hold me to this either, but I think Renfield has more lines of spoken dialogue in the film than Dracula himself.
That might be true. Dracula himself is probably not in as many scenes because, he's the more mysterious character. And when he does speak, he's very reserved. He doesn't go into long speeches. I tried to look up that article today, but I couldn't find it. I did find something talking about how Lugosi was paid less than the Jonathan Harker actor was, but they didn't give exact numbers. I seem to remember it being something like the Jonathan Harker actor made something like it was either $3,500 or $35,000 for doing the movie, which is a lot more today. Whereas Lugosi was paid something like 1/4 of what he was. I guess he was newly breaking into American movies and he was willing to play Dracula for cheap just to get to do it. So
now, I believe before he got that role, he was doing Dracula on Broadway, if I'm correct. I do remember reading that somewhere, but that doesn't surprise me that he'd be paid less. When he did The Raven, even though he was the main character, Boris Karloff got top billing on that.
Obviously, most people who follow his history at all know that he was offered Frankenstein and he turned it down because they wanted him to wear so much makeup and he didn't want to cover up his face. He was kind of like I don't know if I want to say classical actor, but he's someone who wants to show his face. After he turned that down, Karloff ended up becoming this huge horror star, even better known than Lugosi at the time, or more highly regarded. So I think that's behind a lot of the issues that we know about it, especially with the secondary character Karloff getting higher billing.
Here's a tidbit that I bet you didn't know about Lugosi and Frankenstein. Lugosi would go on to play the monster in one of the sequels to Frankenstein, far down the road of sequels. This is not Frankenstein. It's not Bride of Frankenstein. I want to say it's House of Frankenstein, but I'm not 100%, but it's far down the road.
I believe you're correct on that House of Frankenstein.
When people think of the monster, when kids would portray the monster on the playground, one of the tropes they do is they always put their arms straight out as they walk. Like, Karloff never does that once in the entire movie. That move that the kids have imitated and it's become iconic for the Frankenstein monster comes from Lugosi's portrayal, because there's a moment halfway through the film where the monster is blinded and that's how he walks. So the kids, the look of Frankenstein that survives to this day, that move, that signature move, comes from Lugosi, not from Karloff.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. In fact, I think I may have seen that movie at one time, and I do remember that happening where the monster was blinded at one point and kind of walking around with his arms out. So that's really interesting that the signature move is actually from Lugosi. I did not know that.
Attributable to our boy Bela.
Well, he's even cooler than I knew before we started talking today. Now, of course, we're also here tonight to discuss one of the other biggest names in the history of horror, the dapper and debonair, Mr. Jason Voorhees. Do we have any Friday the 13th fans with us here on the show tonight?
I think I've heard of that franchise.
Pray tell, have heard of something about it.
It's ringing a bell.
Obviously, we talked about this ahead of time, but we want to discuss the Friday the 13th series. The first film of the series, the original, which Nehring and I briefly touched on last week when we were talking about the Halloween series. What do you say about the very first Friday the 13th film, Nehring?
Well, first, I would say that your timing could not be better, because less than 2 months ago, both Mr. Barnes and myself were on the grounds of the Boy Scout camp, Camp Nobi Bosco, up in scenic, panoramic Blairstown, New Jersey, where they filmed the first Friday the 13th. It's still there, still a fully functioning Boy Scout camp. Obviously, they haven't had any camps come through this summer with the current pandemic, but with an eye towards increasing their revenue streams, they opened the camp up this summer and this fall to a lot more frequent tours than they've done in the past. So Tony and I were able to visit the site. We met some cast members, and we wrapped the whole evening up with a screening of the movie on the beach, where Jason's mom meets with an untimely end.
Yeah, that was amazing. That was absolutely amazing. And might also add, they are doing, again, if anyone's interested in that, a Halloween night tour up there.
I've heard of that. I actually got an email about that. Obviously, I think I'm further away from there than you guys, so I don't know that I'll be traveling there myself. But yeah, that seems like it would be a cool thing to do.
It's a fun program. I don't know I can't remember the name of the organization that does it, but it's a good group of people, big time Friday the 13th fans, very knowledgeable, very friendly. And I would certainly recommend to any and all listeners, if you're in the New Jersey area and you want to see a piece of film history, get yourself up to Camp Novi Bosco.
I agree.
Now, a big question I have here is, have either of you guys met any of the actors from the first movie?
I have met just about everybody from that first movie, obviously with the exception of Kevin Bacon, which I might also add they're trying to get to come up to that tour at the camp. Now, whether that succeeds or not, that's a different story.
Now, that's actually kind of where I was going with this. It was like a trick question. I was going to quickly play the Kevin Bacon game with you if you said yes. So by proxy, you only need 2 steps to get to Kevin Bacon.
Absolutely.
That's right.
What about you, Nehring? I assume you've met a lot of them too.
Yeah, I've met virtually the whole cast. It's kind of easier to list the ones I haven't met. I haven't met Robbie Morgan, who plays Annie, the would-be cook for the camp. She never actually makes it to the camp. Robbie Morgan does the convention circuit, and so once the pandemic's over, if the convention scene starts up again, I'm sure I'll meet her someday. I've had a bad habit of missing her every time she's come to an autograph signing. But Tony and I got to meet Ari Lehman, who played young Jason at the end of the film up at the camp 2 months ago. Janine Taylor, who plays Marcy. Adrienne King, a lovely, lovely lady who plays, of course, Alice, the final girl. Ron Milkey, Officer Dorff. It's a shame, a real shame, that we lost Laurie Bartram when we did. She played Brenda, and I could only imagine that she was just lovely to meet in person, but unfortunately, we lost her to cancer some time ago.
Now, last time here with Nehring, we were discussing the Halloween franchise, and because of that, we had to touch a little bit on the Friday the 13th franchise because it was, in a way, not really based off of, but Sean Cunningham. He was watching Halloween one night, and he decided he wants to rip off Halloween, his words. So who did he call, Nehring?
I want to say he called Victor Brook Miller, who ultimately became the screenwriter for the movie.
As you said, he basically called him up in the middle of watching Halloween and said, drop everything you're doing. We're going to rip off Halloween. And of course, that turned into something much bigger than just a ripoff of Halloween. It spawned the other, probably, if I'm not mistaken, even bigger franchise than Halloween, Friday the 13th.
I've never done the math, but I would not be a bit surprised to learn that dollar for dollar, Friday the 13th has been more lucrative than Halloween as a franchise.
Yeah, I would probably guess that too, just based on the fact that in the 80s, Friday the 13th, almost every single year had a new movie because each one was so lucrative for them that they were able to quickly just make another one for the next year and keep that going for such a long time. Whereas with Halloween, they had successful movies, but it wasn't as often. And it wasn't until the latter half of the 80s when they kind of restarted the Myers story, which kind of trailed into the early 90s and basically died until H2O.
Right, yeah, you're absolutely right. Not unlike the Saw franchise of the past decade. You go back, you look, I mean, it's every year. 80 is Friday the 13th, 81 is part 2, 82 or 83 is 82 part 3.
Is part 3.
Yeah, 82 is part 3, and then 84.
84 is part 4, 85 is part 5. It just kind of goes like that for a while. 86 is part 6. 7, I think we're going to jump to 88 for 7.
I believe you're correct on that.
Part 8 is definitely 89. And then there was a 4-year gap before Jason Goes to Hell.
Did they even plan on continuing it before they got to Jason Goes to Hell? It seems to me that they had just kind of let it die, and then maybe someone got an idea and just went with it to make that last one. Or not last one, but at the time it was supposed to be the last one, just like part 4 was.
From what I understand from that one, and I could be wrong, but I do recall hearing this, that they didn't have the rights to the name Friday the 13th. That's why that wasn't in the title.
Oh.
So they decided to call it Jason Goes to Hell: The Final Friday. Don't quote me on that, but I think that was.
No, you're right, because I think Paramount was retaining the title rights, and it was New Line that put out Jason Goes to Hell, and I think it was some kind of bidding war for the rights, and they got the rights to the character, but that was it.
Okay.
One of the things that I like most about part one, the camp setting continues throughout the franchise, but I don't think the movie ever felt more like it was taking place in a camp. 2 takes place in a camp as well. It's counselors getting ready for a camp. And then they kind of get away from the summer camp setting again. I don't think they actually return to a camp again until 6, which of course has the benefit of actually having kids in the camp. There are children present in part 6 while all this is going on. For me, 1 did it first, did it best. It might be a function of the fact that it was taking place or that it was filmed on location. But for me, when you're thinking 1, you're thinking, I am in a summer camp right now. And that's what makes 1 stand out to me.
What about you, Tony?
What I enjoy about that movie is the grindhouse feel, the gritty camera, the low budget feel. I love The Shining, but when this came out, The Shining came out at the same time. And I have a feeling that a lot of people who were falling asleep in the seats in The Shining were jumping out of their seats Friday the 13th. It just kept going, and it came at you without mercy. That's just what I expect of a slasher movie, and that's the epitome of it. Halloween is probably one of my favorite movies of all time. However, and I think Mike will agree with me on this, I don't consider that a typical slasher movie. I consider it more of a suspense, and like you say, Mike, an art house movie. But Friday the 13th was just hardcore, in your face, fun, everything you could ask for in a slasher movie.
One of the things I like about it, which we discussed with Nehring last week, is that even though it set out to be a quote unquote ripoff of Halloween, the first Friday the 13th movie completely removes the idea of a guy walking around killing people. They kind of fool you into believing that's going on, and then reveal, obviously, it's the mother avenging the death of her son at the end of it, which I think is very different from the precedent set by Halloween. So I kind of give them credit for going in that different direction, despite blatantly saying they're going to rip off Halloween.
Well, and you raise a good point, because no one really looks at this movie this way now, because we have the benefit of 10 sequels to color our perception. But at the time when they put out Friday the 13th, there was a whodunit element to it. There are scenes where we are supposed to look at Steve Christie, kind of, give him the side eye a little bit, saying, he's acting a little weird. There are scenes with Bill, Harry Crosby, Bing Crosby's son. There are scenes with Bill where, like, when he kills the snake, and he's looking at the snake kind of sinisterly, and he's holding the machete, and supposed to think, maybe Bill's up to no good here. So they're very subtle moments. They don't call a lot of attention to them, but there are subtle moments throughout the entire movie where we are supposed to be guessing about which of the cast members we've seen already could be the killer. And of course, it's kind of a cheat at the end. The killer is someone we haven't seen at all through the movie, so there's no way you could have guessed.
I was going to say, and obviously the quality level isn't the same, but if Alfred Hitchcock were to make a straight up slasher movie, it might be Friday the 13th.
I don't think that's a fair comparison.
Yeah, there is that element of mystery of the whodunit, like trying to figure out who the killer is, which I think is a big Hitchcock thing.
I could see that on a bigger budget.
That brings us to Friday the 13th Part 2. Now, this is the one where we actually do transition to slightly more of a Halloween type feel. Not in the sense that it's an art house movie, but that we now have the silent killer who's going around and slashing people. Whereas in the first one, we didn't have that. We had the mother, and then we had the brief appearance of the young Jason at the end. But now in Part 2, we see him, I guess, no longer deciding to live in the water. And he has his own little cabin, a little shrine going on. But what do you like about Part 2, Nehring? Or do you like it?
Well, I have a lot to say about Part 2, but I would yield the floor to my colleague, Tony, who is the world-renowned expert and champion all-time fan of Part 2. Part 2 is
All right.
definitely Tony's movie.
Let's go over to Tony then for this one.
Okay, I'll try to sum this up in an expeditious way here. I think this, as far as slasher movies go, and I'm not including Halloween as a typical slasher movie, I think this is the best slasher movie ever made. I think this is the best Jason. I know everybody's going to disagree with me on that, but Nehring, I don't know how you feel about that. I know we've kind of agreed on that, but something about the sack, I think it is more scary than the hockey mask. You project your own fears just like you do on Michael Myers' mask. I think it has the best final girl. Amy Steele rocked that role. The cast was all likable. Jason ran. Well, he ran in part 3 and part 4, but it's just that sense of urgency you get, and especially when the music kicks in, Harry Manfredini's music, and he's chasing her through the woods, and you feel like you got to run or else you're going to get killed, basically. Right. It's not someone walking after her and then just suddenly appearing in front of her. There's much more I could say to that. I think we'll get into a discussion with it. So, Mike, I will let you take the floor, and if we can shoot it back and forth a little bit.
I can't disagree with anything you just said. I think part 2 is a perfect movie. I mean, it's flawless. There's nothing wrong with it at all. This Halloween season, I've had the opportunity to watch all of the series again. And one thing that I've been kind of turning my attention to, because I've seen these movies a million times, is the distinctness of each Jason and each actor who played him. They all have different body language, and to the point where you can tell just by build and by movement which Jason you're watching. You're right. I mean, there never was another interpretation of Jason quite like Steve Dash. It was a big thing in that era with The Hills Have Eyes, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The idea of mountain folk, these sort of inbred or deformed mountain people, it was a real trend in horror movies at the time. And this was Friday the 13th sort of foray into that. It's very effective. Steve Dash is just terrifying.
It's definitely not my favorite Friday the 13th movie, but I can definitely tell you different areas where I appreciate it. Number one, as you were saying, Steve Dash and his performance, there were no, I mean, other than the brief child Jason Ari Lehman appearance at the end of part 1, there was no precedent for playing adult Jason. So he completely whole cloth invented the character the way, he didn't write the script, but he invented the way he was going to play it. Another thing that I like, I know Tony mentioned he likes the sack mask, which is actually Tony's default image he's using right now inside of the recording room here. But one cool thing I like about that, after, I don't know if you guys have seen this movie, but I discovered The Town That Dreaded Sundown.
I'm familiar.
Yeah, there's a great movie by that exact name. It's the second one made with that name. I believe it was released in 2015. And I love the movie so much that I went and watched the original, which is used as a plot point within the second one. It's like they show how, and this happens in real life. I've spoken to people who live in that area. I don't know if they're still doing it today, but for a long time, every Halloween, the drive-in in Texarkana would play that original movie because it was based on an actual killer in Texarkana. And he, within the movie at least, I don't know if this is how he dressed in real life. I don't know what the reports were. But in the movie, he wore the sack mask that looks a lot like the one Jason used in Friday the 13th Part 2.
Yep, that's correct. He had 2 eyes in it, though. But
yeah, that's true. That's the difference. It's no, he's only allowed to have 1 eye. Tony says so.
No, but I just something about part 2. It's always stuck with me. Maybe it was one of the first ones I've seen when I was younger, but there's just something about that Jason. Perhaps it's Steve Dash's performance, if you can call that a performance. I mean, he's obviously a stuntman, but he did leave his mark in that role. And there's a scene in there that what I mean by the sense of urgency of what's going on. If you guys remember it, when Amy Steele is standing at the door and it's locked, and she's got the knife in her hand, and then that pitchfork comes through the door. Do you recall that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. at that moment, obviously you got Harry Manfredini's music going on, and she hauls ass and just jumps out that window. And it's just, she really portrayed the terror in that scene right there. And that's what I love about that movie, is it was just constant on your edge. And I haven't seen that in the other ones. Now I love them all for their own separate reasons, but that one just, to me, terrified me more than the other ones.
Well, and one thing you commented on that I want to touch on briefly, Tony, is also just the perfectness of the supporting cast. This is something that we saw in 1. It's done to perfection in 2. And then, unfortunately, as the series goes on, the supporting cast, essentially the victims, they kind of become interchangeable as the series goes on. You start getting down to 7 and 8, and there's not much that makes them distinct. Whereas in 1, and particularly in 2, each of these kids is a fully fleshed out character. Bill Randolph is a funny guy. You have Paul. Paul is the guy who is in charge, but you can tell he's very fresh to the idea of being in charge. There's Scott is, he's the typical 80s collar turned up preppy cheeseball, but he's also a very funny guy, and he's not a bad guy. He just he wants what he wants, and he's going after it.
You're forgetting one major person here.
We've danced around this, but we can't forget the star of the film, Ted.
Ted, that's right. I was just saying, you're forgetting somebody.
Yeah.
The only guy who's part of the camp, I think, in any movie that survived.
That's right.
He's the final guy.
Yeah, because he was looking for after hours joint.
All right, now on to Friday the 13th, Part 3 in 3D. I personally never saw it in 3D, but yeah, I always appreciated watching it on TV where you could see the parts where you knew it was in 3D if you were in a theater. Like,
if you're watching it on TV, you know exactly what parts you're supposed to be paying attention to in 3D.
Yeah, that's pretty unmistakable.
This one is the one where Jason finally gets his now iconic hockey mask, which was actually just a mask belonging to one of the campers. What was his name?
Shelley.
Okay, yeah, I always forget that. But yeah, this is where he finally got what is now his iconic hockey mask. They could have kept going in the subsequent parts and, kept giving him different masks. Because at this point in the first one, his brief appearance at the end, he didn't have any mask. He was just, in the lake. In the second one, he's got the sack. In the third one, he steals the kid's hockey mask. But I guess maybe they liked it that much, or maybe audiences liked it that much, that they decided to keep that going into part 4.
Yeah, I think it resonated both with crew and with audiences alike. 3 is a guilty pleasure for me. 3 is where the quality starts to noticeably dip. And by that, with regard to 3, I'm talking about just the cheese level. 3 is a very cheesy movie. It has a final girl who has her strengths and her weaknesses. She's a brunette. She's one of I think there were only 2 brunette final girls in the franchise, Chris in part 3 and then Rennie in Jason Takes Manhattan. And she has a very unique personality for a final girl. She's a lovely lady in real life. I'm listing her strengths. The weakness, I will say, is she's not a strong actress. There's a real a real stiffness to the way she gives a line reading, although she is head and shoulders above the guy who plays her boyfriend. So it's not a great cast. It's a new Jason, Richard Brooker, who unfortunately he's no longer with us, but he played a different Jason than Steve Dash. His is bigger, more hulking. He, I think, introduces the idea of a walking Jason, although, as Tony will point out, he does run at points, but he's the first one who I think saw the menace behind just a silent, almost statuesque Jason. And in the same way that he gave us the image of Jason that we take to this day with the hockey mask, I will also say that he gave us the one piece of continuity that lasts through the entire franchise, because at the end of the movie, Chris brains him in the left side of the forehead with an axe, and that gouge in the hockey mask, no matter what else changes through the movie, or through the franchise, that gouge remains. So that gouge is the one piece of never changing continuity in the franchise.
Somehow it stayed the same in part 8 when it was a new mask.
And when he had new clothing even out of nowhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was the most egregious of problems, I think, in all of the Friday the 13th movies that I can remember, is that at part 7, he looks awesome. His clothes are all shredded. You can see the bone and the shredded flesh below it. He's basically a hulking zombie. He gets chained to the bottom of the lake at the end of that one. Then they show him at the bottom of the lake still at the beginning of part 8, but he has a brand new jumpsuit on out of nowhere.
Yeah.
It's like someone went down and gave him a fresh change of clothing before pulling him up.
He got a nice set of gloves too while he was down there.
Yeah. For some reason. What Nehring said about part 3, I forgot to point that out myself, is that this was obviously a differently played Jason. Part 2, Jason was more of like a regular guy who happens to live in a cabin in the woods and kill people, but he was more normal sized, like average sized guy. He wasn't some big hulking figure. He did not yet turn into this menacing, slow walking figure either. He behaved the way you would think a serial killer would behave. But in part 3, as Nehring said, we're introduced to Richard Brooker's version of this, which is a much larger, more imposing character. And along with that, he feels he doesn't have to move quickly, although he does run in a couple spots. But for the most part, he does introduce that slow-moving, hulking figure, which developed more and more as these movies went on.
And I would agree with that. And that's where I personally, in my own taste, is what I didn't like as the movies went on and on. And we'll get into that later on as that goes. Part 3 for me, I will say this, it has grown on me. It's also directed by Steve Miner, who did part 2. I think he tried to take on too much with the 3D. Now, I will say this probably brought 3D back into focus, pardon the pun, for theaters. Yeah. And it did very well at the box office. There's a couple things in here, and I don't know if it's a Steve Miner thing or not, but as we recall in part 2, Mark, who was killed on the wheelchair, well, in part 3, we have a pregnant woman killed. I don't know if you guys remember that or not. And then it's alluded, and Nehring, I don't know if you agree with me or not, maybe you need to watch it again. It's kind of alluded that Jason raped Chris in those woods in that flashback.
Yeah, definitely there was a sexual hint to the assault. I'll agree with that.
But again, I appreciate Brooker's performance.
I'll actually, I have text from the movie to bear it out. Obviously, Chris starts the movie off. She's very jarred. Or scarred, I should say, from her encounter years ago in the woods. There's a line where her friends, they're walking to the van, and the guy says to the girl, hey, well, what's a weekend in the woods? Andy is the guy's name. He says, what would a weekend in the woods be without sex? And then his girlfriend says, cool it, Andy, as she looks over at Chris. So there's a sexual element to that assault in the woods. You're right.
So yeah, I just thought that was interesting. They're a little more brutal than they let on, but it's under the covers a little bit as far as how nasty Jason is portrayed in part 2 and part 3, killing the guy in the wheelchair, killing a pregnant woman. That stuff didn't need to be added in, but it was put in on purpose. I will say this, Brooker, I don't have a problem with the way he portrayed Jason. Now that we went to Juggernaut Jason, the kill with the harpoon, he did that like a pimp, and he just drops it and just walks away. So that's another one of my favorite kills in all the franchise. 3 has grown on me. You have to watch it in 3D though. Without watching it in 3D, it's not that good.
The Crazy Ralph guy they meet, who's asleep on the road, he holds up the eyeball. Yeah, that guy does not in any way hold a candle to the real Crazy Ralph.
No, not at all. Yeah, was Crazy Ralph in real life dead at that time?
Probably so.
I mean, he was dead in the movies, obviously. I just wasn't sure if he died.
And with that, maybe we should move on to part 4, which was supposed to be, the very final chapter until the next 7 of them. It was supposed to be the last movie, hence the name, Friday the 13th, the final chapter.
And you know what it did?
What did it do?
It made just too darn much money.
Right. They couldn't let it die.
I think Final Chapter might have been the most lucrative of all of them to date at that point. Paramount was looking to kind of cut ties with the franchise. I think, they were a little embarrassed by it. And then the Final Chapter goes out and makes a frigging shit ton of money. And everyone's like, okay, all right, let's just hold our nose and keep going then.
It started a dance craze too.
Oh, the Crispin Glover dance. Just goes to show he was always crazy. It wasn't just his portrayal in Back to the Future. He was like that before.
Definitely his own person.
Yeah, I think the survival of Jason depends on how much money he has. So you're right, Nehring. When that made a shit ton of money, his death could no longer just be his death. He had to be revived after that. Now, I remember thinking with the whole story with Corey Feldman and all that, this actually, to me, had a lot more story than some of the other ones, at least to that point.
Yeah, once again, as with 1 and 2, there's a lot of subtle stuff going on in 4. Obviously, none of which matters because all these stories meet with the same end. But just to jump back to 1 for a second, there's a real subtlety to some of the stories going on in 4. There's a lot of character action going on, and we see some of that in 1 too, with the love triangle that goes on between Alice and Steve Christie and Bill. It's muted. It's not in the spotlight, but it's there. Same thing in 4. There is the story of the guy who's dating Judy Aronson, the brunette, who ends up in the raft midway through the movie. He's clearly devoted to his girlfriend, but his head is spun by these vivacious twins that just pop up out of nowhere. One of the twins is more of a party girl than the other. Both of the two nerd guys, Lawrence Monason and Crispin Glover, have little mini crushes on each of the two twins at one point or another. And then, of course, the really kind of sad story in part 4 is the girl who I thought was going to be the final girl the whole way through. She's the good girl who loves her boyfriend, Peter Barton.
Sarah.
Sarah, thank you. She clearly is head over heels in love with her boyfriend. He's head over heels in love with her. There's no question about him flirting with anybody else. The idea of sex makes her nervous, and she finally decides, after a lot of really having to try to talk herself into it. This is a big step for her. And as an audience, we get to feel that big step every inch of the way. And then it's a Friday the 13th movie, so everybody gets massacred in the shower. It's more than any of the movies that would follow. Each of these characters have their own story and their own goals and their own dreams. And, of course, it all comes to nothing because it's a Friday the 13th movie.
I would agree with that as far as the characterizations go. We got so used to what we were watching. I mean, in hindsight, we see all these movies. We don't see them at the time they came out, and we watch them over and over. But as you look back on them, you definitely see more character development in part 4. And you see, obviously, the family. There's the first one with the family in it. That's totally different. I would totally agree with that. And as far as the character development goes on that.
Who do we know as the person who played Jason in this movie? Because I'm looking at IMDb. It has 5 different people listed because it's showing archival footage from the other movies. So Tom Savini plays him in a hitchhiker murder scene, uncredited. But Ted White's listing is uncredited as well. That makes no sense. He's like the main guy playing him in the movie, yet they didn't credit him.
Yeah, I don't know why they didn't credit him. He is essentially Jason in this movie. The Savini scene with the hitchhiker kill, it might be Savini's hand we see. But if you're looking at Jason on camera in the final chapter, you're looking at Ted White.
The Savini scene was done for special effects purposes. They were using a real knife, and the setup he had on the lady's neck had to be completely careful with that, or she would have really gotten stabbed.
The only thing I'll say real quick is Ted White, who played Jason, is an interesting guy because he's a stuntman from the old golden days of Hollywood. This is a guy who can tell you the stories about Cary Grant or Rock Hudson, who he probably stunt doubled for those guys once or twice. I would say that Ted White is the most dapper Jason of the series. If James Bond or Cary Grant were going to play Jason, this is the guy that would do it. Ted White is just the consummate gentleman's gentleman.
And he played a badass Jason too. I'll give him that. He's one of my favorite portrayals of him.
Now let's move on to part 5. After Jason is, for all intents and purposes, dead, suddenly part 5 comes out.
A new beginning.
Of the end.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Now, one thing I'll say about this, I'd say the intro, the first scene to this, is extremely scary to me. With Corey Feldman from part 4, they bring him back for this scene. It ends up being a dream sequence, but he's walking out toward the cemetery where Jason is buried in the middle of the night. It's raining really hard. I think he's seeing a couple people dig him up. And after Jason kills the people digging him up, he turns and looks directly at Tommy, being Corey Feldman, and just sits there and stares at him. And Corey Feldman is just frozen in fear. He can't move. And to me, that's one of the most terrifying scenes in the entire series, or maybe even in horror film, as far as I'm concerned.
That's an effective scene. It's an effective scene. You're right about that.
Little trivia on that scene. They couldn't get Corey Feldman to come to them on the set wherever they were shooting the movie at. And that scene was shot in Corey Feldman's grandmother's backyard.
Wow.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I learned that off the Crystal Lake documentaries.
Yeah. One other thing I'd add about that scene is I think one of the reasons it's so terrifying is if you picture yourself as the young kid that he is in the movie, and imagine how terrifying that would be to you at that age, let alone as an adult.
Oh, yeah. I was just thinking that one of the reasons we're spending so much time talking about the opening scene is because that's pretty much the only good thing about this movie. If I were to describe this movie in one word, it would be unsavory. The core elements of any Friday the 13th movie are always going to be kills and thrills and boobs. And this was the movie where the director was like, well, if we have enough boobs, do we really need all the kills and thrills? You really get the sense that the director of this movie just wanted to see women take their shirts off.
This movie is the middle of the seesaw for me. It's the beginning of going downhill for me. This movie felt out of time. I don't know if you guys feel this way or not, but did all the previous ones feel more modern to you than this one? This one just felt like it was just out of place. It just didn't feel right. Not just because there wasn't Jason in it, but the clothing, the leather jackets, it looked like it was from the 50s or something. I don't know who made these decisions in this movie. Now, I will say...
the two greasers in the car, yeah, you're absolutely right. What is the deal with having two guys escape from the set of The Wild One to come star in a 1985 Friday the 13th movie?
And the dude with the mustache who's picking up the girl at the diner, he's got like this striped shirt on. He looks like he's another one out of West Side Story. I don't understand. I
actually love and hate that guy because he says one of the lines that I still make fun of and use as a joke when talking to people today. He like rings the buzzer or whatever for the restaurant. And he says, I'll take one Lana with nothing on it to go. He's there to pick up the girl, Lana.
There is one other line I love in this movie, and that resonates me to this day, is the goddamn enchiladas.
Yes. Yeah, I was trying to think of the names of the actors in that scene because I wanted to bring that up. That's a really good part as well. We know the name of the guy in the outhouse, don't we, Tony?
Joanna Mann is all I know him as. He just got arrested for stealing from a grocery store not too long ago. And I'm just wondering if he stole enchiladas.
I was actually making fun of that too. I forget what the context was, but yeah, someone brought him up with the enchiladas thing, and I said the same thing, like, "Oh, did he steal the enchiladas? What's this?" Who's the guy that played his little brother?
Oh, Reggie the Reckless.
Yeah.
Oh, I know it. Shavar Ross.
I'm not really familiar with anything else he's done, but that just.
Shavar Ross was Arnold's friend on Different Strokes, who gets molested by Mr. Carlson.
Poor Shavar.
He was a child actor in roles that no parent should ever want their child to be a child actor in.
I was going to bring up Vic and Joey. First of all, Dominic Braccia, I think his name is, Joey. Poor Corey Haim. Apparently, Braccia was accused by Haim's mother of molesting Haim. So ever since I've heard that, and I actually read the article with her making that claim, I've been saying that Vic made the right choice when he when he took care of Joey in the movie.
Yeah, there's a lot of seamy stuff to 5, not only in front of the camera but also behind it.
So which one was Joey?
Oh, the guy, the fat guy who gets the axe in the back.
Yeah, he tries. Bar. Yeah, he tried to give a candy bar to Vic, who's cutting wood.
So he is the one accused of molesting Corey Haim?
Yeah, Corey Haim's mother has stated publicly that Corey told her he was one of the people who molested him.
Wow. I was not aware of that.
When that was stated publicly, Dominic Braccio, who was still alive at the time, immediately said it was Charlie Sheen. Well, he denied it himself and said, no, that was Charlie Sheen who did that. So 2 things. Number 1, if he knew Charlie Sheen did this, why did he not turn him in? So I hold him complicit regardless. And number 2, it sounds like maybe both of them did, and he was just trying to pass the buck.
So I'm assuming this was during Lucas, that film.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, obviously, I don't have any firsthand knowledge of any of this. I'm just, telling you what the mother said. So Dominic Braccio's sprawling estate cannot sue us for bringing this up. Now, if you thought part 4 was enough and that the movies should have ended at that point, part 5 was probably not what you expected. But part 6 may have also not been what you expected, but soon after discovered you're glad it happened anyway. This, to me, is not just one of, I think it's actually the best film of the series, Jason Lives.
Go ahead, Mike.
I'll let Tony go first so I can be the mediator between the two of you.
Tony has been kicked out of the building.
Here we go.
I think this is not the worst movie in the series, but I think this is where the movies went off the rails. These are slasher movies, and slasher should be a human, in my opinion. We have now transferred to a new Frankenstein. These are now monster movies. They're no longer slasher films. The humor, when you watch part 4 and then you watch part 6, watch them back to back, it's just a totally different world. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying in my taste, it's just not my cup of tea.
Well, and I'll be the mediator because I agree with both of you in the sense that I'm a little more lenient on this movie than Tony is. The humor worked for me. And, Gene Siskel once said that the 2 things you can't argue with anybody is who's pretty and what's funny. You either think someone is pretty or you don't. You either think something's funny or you don't. Michael, we got into a long conversation last week on the humor elements in Halloween 5 and how they didn't work for me at all. The bumbling sheriff's deputies. For whatever reason, the humor in Friday the 13th Part 6 does work for me. So the humor didn't bother me. I wouldn't want to see every film in the franchise take a humorous tone, but for this one, it was fine. I liked the cast in this. I liked the can't really call her the final girl because Tommy Jarvis is the final girl in this movie.
Right.
the final girl who dates the final girl. This actress's name totally escapes me, but she is just terrific. I thought the sheriff was good. I thought the sheriff's deputy was good. I thought the kids were good. Well, again, this is the first movie ever where there's actually kids in attendance in this camp. Right. When the shit starts to hit the fan, I 100% hear what Tony's saying. In fact, to really make Tony reach for the fainting salts, I'm going to invoke Steve Dash and C.J. Graham in the same sentence to say that to see where Jason would go from the Steve Dash portrayal to C.J. Graham. Tony's absolutely right. This is where Jason became essentially a movie monster. But it did work for me. C.J. Graham is sort of the Reader's Digest condensed version of Kane Hodder. And Kane Hodder would go on to make the role his own. I could hear Tony grinding his teeth already. But that's the direction the franchise went in, and I was along for the ride. So 6 works for me.
What you brought up about the kids at the camp, that brings us to one of the greatest lines in the movie, which, do you know what I'm about to say?
I know what you're about to say.
So, What were you going to be when you grew up? Yeah, I like the humor in this one a lot. to address the part about him turning into a monster, I think that's directly attributable, and I like that, but it's directly attributable to the director being a huge fan of old monster movies like the Universal monsters. I mean, he even made a lot of tributes to those movies in this one. The biggest one to me being when Tommy Jarvis is at a payphone in front of a store, he tries to read the sign on what the store is called, and it says Karloff's. And to me, I was immediately more impressed than I even had been before that they did that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with either one of you guys as far as, this is the direction probably that they had to take in this movie. However, we start with walking Jason. We start to show Jason a lot more. He becomes less scary. He becomes more of an anti-hero in this. I know it was done, to revive the franchise, to give it a shot of adrenaline, and most likely to compete with Freddy Krueger. And I blame Freddy Krueger as the downfall of slasher film. I'm just kidding with that one, but yeah. But no, I don't know. There's just a lot of things in this that just don't work for me. And as I said, it's not the worst in the franchise. We're going to get to those. Yeah. But it was definitely on my list as where it went wrong. We're not even counting part 5 because it's not Jason, but this is where it started to go wrong for me. Even Harry Manfredini's music, we're getting into electronic music in this. It's not the same music. Everything is so different. And I know a lot of people, this is their favorite one, and just doesn't work for me in that way.
And one thing I wanted to bring up, something that's a big difference between a character obviously played by different actors between part 5 and part 6, Jason Lives. Tommy Jarvis in part 5, obviously not played by Corey, played by a different actor, is a mute. And I wanted to note how this is connected, or how this reflects the Halloween series. That was kind of the same thing that happened after the traumatic experience, both to Michael Myers and to Jamie Lloyd, which I discussed with Nehring last week. This seems to be maybe this kind of a very similar thing with Tommy after the traumatic experience in part 4 became a mute in part 5. But based off of that, I wanted to note the personality change in Tommy's character between part 5 and part 6. In part 5, he's mute, he's closed off, he's very inward. He's not very fun or communicative or at all communicative. In part 6, he's got this huge personality. Obviously, on some level, he's overcome that. He's loud, he's boisterous. Leading off of that, with what I said about the intro to part 5, I feel like they decided to kind of mirror that in part 6 with this intro, which I liked a lot as well.
Well, there's definitely a parallel between the beginning of 5 and the beginning of 6.
Yeah, because in the beginning of part 5, you see young Tommy in the woods in the rain observing 2 other guys trying to dig up Jason. In part 6, we see then current day Tommy in his, mid-20s or whatever he's supposed to be at that point. He's actually with a friend of his, Horshack, and they go to dig up Jason. They're basically redoing what he saw in his own dream and not realizing that it's going to go wrong in the same way. They go to,
I was going to say, you gave me a thought that I don't think I've ever had before, which is that maybe that dream sequence from 5 is what subconsciously informed Tommy Jarvis' decision to do all that in the beginning of part 6. Maybe the one is a direct reaction to the other.
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing I wanted to point out, just out of sheer coincidence, after we talked and decided to do this Friday the 13th discussion, Red Letter Media uploaded a discussion about a couple of Friday the 13th movies. And one thing that Jay pointed out that I liked and that I noticed because they showed a clip of it in that intro scene in part 6, when Jason comes out of the grave, he looks more like a ghoul out of a DC comics, the old horror comics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he looks more like a ghoul out of those old comics. Very different look than he had before. I mean, he's still a large, menacing guy with a messed up face, but it looks markedly different from before.
I don't know. I just can't get down with the paintball guys.
Well, I also understand that when you have a favorite installment or a favorite portrayal of Jason, all others are going to be lesser to some degree. So obviously that's going to be a thing that all of us have, no matter who our favorite is.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, I don't hate the movie. I do like it for what it is. And you're right, the humor does work for me too. To me, in a Friday the 13th movie is just misplaced. And watching them all in a row, it just doesn't fit for me.
That guy, I can't remember his name, but John Travolta's nephew. He really is Travolta's nephew. When he's showing the kids how to make signals with pebbles is the funniest scene to this day. I've seen it a million times. To this day, I can't watch that scene and not laugh out loud.
I actually don't remember that part. What happens there?
It's just a guy who obviously has... he's a counselor. He's showing his campers how Native Americans would make symbols out of rock piles. And this would tell you to go this way or go that way. And he clearly has no idea what he's talking about and even less interest in what he's talking about. But he's trying to look really knowledgeable to his campers. And it's just really funny.
Yeah, that guy played a good role.
He was funny when he dies too. The whole
this is great. This is great.
Wow. That was
funny. You're right about the female though. Tommy's the other surviving female. She played her part very well. She was a good final second girl, I suppose.
Yeah, second final, associate final. I don't know. Now that brings us to part 7. Once again, we have a different actor playing Jason in this movie. However, this will also be the start of the first time Friday the 13th has had an actor play Jason that they had come back for 3 more sequels. Of course, we're talking about Kane Hodder.
For me, 7 is the forgettable entry of the franchise.
Okay.
Jason fights a girl who has telekinesis. And I don't remember another fucking thing about this movie.
Bernie's in it from Weekend at Bernie's.
Yeah, Bernie's in it. Yeah.
Probably the best looking zombie Jason.
Yes.
The entire cast was forgettable. Probably the worst teenagers, if you could call them teenagers. I don't know what they were. They're 30-somethings. I'm not sure. Again, this is going to be sacrilege to you guys, but I'm not a fan of Kane Hodder as Jason. Kane Hodder's a great guy. Not a fan of him as Jason. Even C.J. Graham moved faster than him, and Kane just walked really slow. He gave him personality, sure. Somehow he just ended up in front of you when you're sprinting, and he's just walking at a leisurely pace. That just didn't do it for me.
I like a lot of what Kane brought. In fact, I think he's the one who decided that Jason should never move quickly. He should never run. He should always walk. Which obviously there was a bit of that started in part 3 and gradually built up to this, but he's obviously the one who decided that is Jason. No matter how fast you run, no matter how many cars you try to drive that won't start, he will always catch you eventually, because eventually you have to stop moving and he doesn't. Another thing, I saw a documentary on Kane Hodder recently that pointed out a lot of other cool things about this specific movie with the portrayal of Jason that I didn't even notice until he mentioned it. I haven't seen it in many years, so that's part of why I didn't recall these things. But his stuntman experience brought him a lot of ideas to give to the director as to the portrayal of Jason, or different ideas of things to do with him. One of the really cool things was the long burn scene. He's famous for doing burns, and in fact, that's what ended up burning him over most of his body at a young age. But there's a famous, really long burn scene in this movie. It's almost like 45 seconds, which is apparently longer than anybody is really supposed to go. Another part that I really think is cool that he came up with the idea for was there's a scene where Jason, instead of going down the stairs, he literally falls backward through them. And that was completely his idea, to just kind of be jettisoned like an animal or something. He just falls backward directly through the stairs. And these are some of the coolest moves I've seen Jason do. I mean, not that he did that on purpose, or things that happened to him maybe.
Well, once again, I'm going to be the mediator because I don't hate him as much as Tony does. I don't love him as much as you do. I'm kind of in the middle. I have to respect the fact that the look he gave Jason was, it's hard to imagine if you're talking to someone who doesn't know these movies and you talk about the personality someone brings to a character. Any layman or any newbie or any normie is going to say, well, how much character can you bring to a guy that doesn't talk? And his face is hidden behind a mask. And that's when I think we overlook the amount of character that can be communicated through body language. And Kane Hodder made the role his own, and there's something to be said for the performance that brought him back, as you say, unprecedented, brought him back for 3 more movies. But the one thing about Kane Hodder that I'm going to talk about that I don't know gets a lot of note is that Kane Hodder might be the first actor that made Jason a movie star. And I'm thinking about, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. I'm talking about the publicity tour for Jason Takes Manhattan when Jason was a guest star on the Arsenio Hall show.
Yes. I watched that live.
And he sits there and he does nothing through the entire interview.
Right.
But at one point, he slowly turns his head towards Arsenio, and it got the biggest cheer.
Yeah.
And there's another scene in Jason Takes Manhattan, obviously. Well, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and call it. I'll Maverick call the ball. We're segueing into Jason Takes Manhattan. There's a scene.
Hey, I'm not done talking about 7, so you say what you want to, but we'll get back to it too. So go ahead.
All right. There's a scene in Jason Takes Manhattan, one of the only scenes that takes place in New York, and where he's in Times Square, and the camera just dollies around him as he's looking around at all the big lights. The actress who plays Rennie in that movie describes they brought him to Times Square in an ambulance, and a crowd had formed because obviously they were filming something. And Jason gets out of the ambulance. The crowd goes insane. Jason's there. And just like on Arsenio, he just stands there, lets the moment play out, and then slowly turns. And the crowd went bonkers. You got to give him props. This is the guy who, more than anyone else, made Jason a movie star.
Oh, I give him total props. Total props. He for what he did with the role, for what he did with that, he did a great job with that.
Yeah, I've always loved that Arsenio appearance. Just to expand a little bit on that, he comes out, he sits down. Everybody thought it was going to be an interview with Kane Hodder, the guy playing Jason. Of course, he introduced him just as Jason Voorhees, and he walked out in full costume. But they still expected him to answer questions, which he didn't do. Right. Arsenio just sat there asking interview questions. And he'd sit there saying nothing the whole time. It just got funnier and funnier as it went along until, like you said, he finally just slowly turned and looked at him. And the crowd just, lost it at that point because it was like he was saying, "What's wrong with you, Arsenio Hall?" Like whatever stupid question he just asked him.
I'm pretty sure he had a machete with him too, and he kind of twitched that a little bit too.
Yeah,
he got a reaction.
Yeah. One thing I know I mentioned this earlier, but I want to touch on this with part 7. To me, this is by far the coolest looking Jason in any of the movies. They had his clothing was basically shredded. You could see not only stripped flesh underneath the flesh, you could also see bone coming out in certain spots through the shredded clothing. He just looked like the biggest, most badass zombie you've ever seen, which again, they ruined at the beginning of part 8 by giving him brand new clothing to cover that up. But the last thing I wanted to comment on with part 7 is I liked the girl with telekinesis, because that was the first time I think we found a character in a Friday the 13th movie that had the ability to be more powerful than Jason. And I don't know if we've seen that since then, but I really thought that was cool.
Well, I mean, you can almost imagine the producers sitting around, because essentially every Friday the 13th movie is the same. So you can almost imagine the producer saying, well, last time we gave her brown hair. What can we do this time? And then someone's saying, hey, what if she was telekinetic?
Right.
And we could go bionic next time.
That's it.
Right. Well, hey, they kind of do in Jason X.
Hey. You're right.
And with that, let's move on to part 8, as Nehring already tried to steer us toward. I'll let him take the wheel now.
8 is a guilty pleasure for me, just like 3 is. I believe me when I say, I know, whatever you're going to say, whatever Tony's going to say, I know, I absolutely know as I'm watching this is the definition of a guilty pleasure. I'm sitting here and I'm watching this and I'm saying, it's shit. I know it's shit. But I can't stop smiling. 8 works for me. I've got nothing more profound to say than that. I wish that they had been able to film more in New York. Can't remember whether it was budgetary reasons or for permit reasons, but they ended up not being able to shoot all that they wanted to shoot in New York, and that's why it's basically Jason on a boat. I'm with you all. You're all going to say, what the hell kind of lake opens up into the ocean? You're right. I know.
Well, that's looking for logic in a movie about a kid who stayed in the water for a couple dozen years before deciding to come out.
That's true.
Yeah, so we don't need to look for logic.
That's true. I've got nothing logical or in any way that's going to make sense about why I like part 8. I really do.
I guess I'll jump in before Tony, because I actually like it too. For the most part, I like most Friday the 13th movies. I wouldn't say it's the best one, but right off the bat, one of the things I like about it is to branch off of what you said about not spending a ton of time in New York. To me, this movie, it's almost 2 hours long, so it's almost like 2 short 1 hour movies together. You get like the first 50 minutes on a boat, then the last 50 minutes or however long in New York. So it's kind of like almost a double feature of shorter movies to me. I think that works for it. But yeah, my biggest complaint, as I've already mentioned, is in the beginning, they show him still chained at the bottom of the lake where he was at the end of part 7. But he magically has these fresh new set of clothing. It's not the shredded clothing that he had on when they chained him down there. And as Tony pointed out, he's got gloves, which, I guess he was cold.
It's a fun movie. It's certainly not my favorite. I like the idea of Jason on a boat. If we would have done that story and just kept it at that would have been kind of neat. That would have been unique.
Yeah.
The lake could have been big. There could have been a big yacht out there or whatever, that would have been interesting to me. I guess we're introduced to teleportation Jason in this movie. I'm still trying to figure out the dance hall scene with Lady Deathstrike. That's the girl that played Lady Deathstrike. I can't remember her name right now. She looks from the left. He's over there standing on the left. She looks to the right. He's over there. Then he's in front of her. Then he's behind her. And then he's on top of her. And I just don't understand the director's thought process in that. But you're right, Nehring. It's a guilty pleasure. I don't hate any Friday the 13th movie. I will say this. Growing up in, I guess it came out in 1988, part 7, 1988. I was in 89. I was in 9th grade, and I was a big fan of the movies. And 7 was my favorite back then, believe it or not. I always remember when part 8 came out, and like I said, I stayed up to watch the Arsenio Hall show, and then I went to see it. At that age, even, as big of a fan as I was let down by this movie. The makeup was horrible. I don't even understand what he was supposed to look like at the end. It's just like a glob of shit on his face. But no, other than that, if it's on TV, I'll sit down and watch it, but I won't seek it out.
I hear you.
I guess I should encapsulate this by agreeing that I think it's a fun movie. I think the idea of the whole thing where Jason is here, then he's there. I think we throw all logic out the window, as Nehring has said a few times, once you discover the kid is still alive, so to speak, in the lake at the beginning after who knows how many years.
Well, yeah, obviously.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think
introduce me to teleportation powers if he has to.
Right.
Well, and I mean, let's not forget the fact that toxic sludge can make him a little boy again. And not only a little boy, but a little boy who looks healthier and more normal than he looked before he drowned in the lake in the first place.
There were three or four portrayals of him as a boy in that movie, and he looked different every single time. The makeup was different every time. One time he had hair, but his face was still deformed. The next time he was bald and his face was deformed. And at the end, he was just normal.
I don't know if that was really meant to be like he was literally there, or if it was supposed to be some sort of artistic license to show that this undead monster murderer used to be an innocent child until life happened or shit happened to him. To me, that's the way it comes across. I never looked at it as that was supposed to literally be there, the kid. I might be wrong. Maybe the director is dumb and he thought the kid was supposed to be there.
I have no idea on that. So I'm just, I'm at a loss.
But yeah, I think it, along with what I said about it being fun, I think it has a lot of really cool individual scenes. Number one, the one everybody knows, Jason walking down the street in Manhattan. There's this group of like gang members sitting there with a boom box playing music really loud. He just walks straight through it and destroys their radio. And they think they're going to be badass and kick his ass or whatever. And all he has to do is stop, just lift his mask and show them his face, and they back off immediately. To me, that's like on the level with what we were saying about Jason just slowly turns his head and the audience goes crazy. I think that was one of those moments.
Well, I mean, I think you just nailed it. It might be the first time in a Jason movie period where scenes were done for the purpose of getting the audience to cheer Jason.
Right. And another scene that I think may have been created to get the audience to cheer for Jason, the rooftop kill with the boxer.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely.
Another guy we know mentioned the other day, he thinks this is the best Jason kill, literally taking one punch and sending the guy's head sailing through the air without his body, of course.
Right.
Yeah, the only thing I can say about it is that, like you guys were just saying, that you're supposed to cheer for Jason in this.
Yeah.
And again, I think we're going back to this franchise competing with the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, where we are now doing the anti-hero rather than
right. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think Friday the 13th was like that before Part 7, where people actually liked the killer, before Part 8. But you're right. They may have consciously been trying to move it in that direction with this one. As Nehring said, they do seem to have a lot of scenes where they seem to have written it to make Jason sort of a hero, even though he's the killer, the anti-hero, as Tony said. And with that, we will move on from Part 8 to the next movie, which I don't believe had a part number listed with it.
Jason Goes to Hell.
The Final Friday. Which was not the final one, even though they said it was for the second time. Right off the bat, as I've said about a few of these other movies, well, number one, I'll state up front, I really don't like this one at all.
No.
But I really like the opening scene, though, but that's it. Friday the 13th. Yeah. Well, yeah, for obvious reasons. But I think if they would have ended the movie at the end of that first scene, it would have been better and people wouldn't feel ripped off as much, even though it was only a 10-minute movie.
Or just gotten rid of every other cast member but that FBI agent.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There you go.
It's a very effective, you took the words right out of my mouth. It's a very effective opening scene. And then nothing in the remainder of the movie feels even remotely like a Friday the 13th movie.
Right.
This feels like a sci-fi movie of the week. Sci-fi movie channel.
Kind of, yeah. In fact, you know what I would say about that beginning? That is maybe, unless you guys can name another one, that might be the intro to what we know as meta horror movies now, which Wes Craven did with The New Nightmare and then with Scream, where it actually plays on tropes from horror movies in order to achieve something. Like that opening scene, the FBI set up a fake horror movie scene, literally making fun of all these types of movies in order to attract Jason to trap him.
They'd come back to that well in Jason X. Jason stumbles on the equivalent of the holodeck, and the two hologram women are like playing up the horror movie slasher tropes.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, they set it up so that he can recreate one of his most famous kills, which I thought was hilarious that he did that, being that they were already being meta at that point.
That was a sleeping bag kill, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's what that was.
It's been a while since I've seen that one.
But yeah, Jason Goes to Hell, the Final Friday. Seeing it for the first time in the theaters, it was an interesting entry into the franchise, but I don't think I've returned to this movie in well over 10 years.
Jason Goes to Hell, to me, the intro scene was incredible. After that, everything was so bad, it made me laugh out loud. Every couple minutes, I was laughing, wondering if this was a joke and the real movie was going to start at any time.
Yeah, it's not a good film.
Yeah, the director was a first-time director on this, and he pretty much had carte blanche, from what I understand, to an extent, obviously, to take this film where he wanted to go. They wanted to get away from the whole slasher thing and get into more of a supernatural element to it, which in turn was to bring Freddy and Jason together for Freddy versus Jason, which did not happen for multiple years down the line on that. The things they let this director do, he should have been reeled in. And Cunningham was attached to this as well, which surprises me.
Oh, One comparison I'm going to make is, and I don't remember names, but the guy with cowboy hat who was supposed to be the guy who knew what was really going on with Jason and was, trying to, get the ancient dagger or whatever it was that he needed to get to really kill him. Did he eat Jason's heart to become him at some point?
Yes.
That was one of the things I laughed out loud at. That just happened throughout the entire movie. I kept seeing things happen and thought I was supposed to be laughing at it.
You raise an interesting point that just like with the Halloween franchise, both these franchises are based on very simple ideas. Here's a slasher in the woods. Holy shit, he's got a knife. When you start adding all these layers of lore to it, whether it's the Cult of Thorn with Michael Myers or whatever the fucking mythology they were trying to lay on in this movie, his evil can pass from body to body if you consume him, or in the case of Aaron Gray, if he goes all up in you. It was just way too much for a franchise that doesn't need this much lore.
Well, I think we find out he had a sister in this movie as well, too.
Right.
And not only that, we get a special appearance from the Necronomicon from the Evil Dead movies in this film as well.
In fact, I would make a comparison between that cowboy hat guy and the Cult of Thorn walk-in dude from Halloween Part 5 that we were talking about. It's something that you could have made a much better movie by completely excluding this person at all costs.
I 100% agree.
I guess let's move on to that next one.
Jason X. Some interesting shit. Very effective opening once again. It's a sort of a trope among horror franchises that when you completely give up and have run out of ideas, shoot the guy into space. They did it with the Hellraiser franchise. They did it with Leprechaun. Shoot the guy into space. It gave us a movie where you're not going to be bored. You're not going to see things you've seen before because everything's brand new. The android was who can kick Jason's ass was an interesting addition. The holodeck, as I said before, was an interesting addition. The machine that can rebuild tissue was an interesting addition. And of course, having the machine not know the difference between Jason's body and the metal of his weaponry.
Right.
So making cyborg Jason was kind of cool.
Yes.
I don't think it stands the test of time going back and looking at it now, but everything you're seeing in Jason X is novel, and I have to give it props for that.
The positives would be that they had a lot of kind of original ideas in it. The negative would be that they set it far into the future so that now they're kind of trapped in the corner. If they made enough money to make another movie, they're faced with going back in time, back to the present, unless they were just going to continue going even further into the future, which seems like it wouldn't really work.
Well, and I'm going from memory on this. I want to say that even the opening scene was in the near future. So theoretically, you could do more movies that take place between today and that point.
I like the premise of it, which had probably been done before, which aside from whether they were in space or not, I like the idea that this is at some point in the future where I can't remember if it's just like a scientific team or a team of students of some sort, that they apparently have this lore of this Jason character who couldn't be killed and finally was killed on Earth. And they decide to go take him to study him. Of course, the whole, we must keep him to study him has been in like every movie ever made. But just the idea of these students deciding they want to, I guess the logic is they would think that if it was hundreds of years later, that there wouldn't be any way of him posing danger.
It's okay. He just wanted his machete back.
Right. He just wants his stuff. Leave him alone.
Well, first of all, I thought Industrial Light and Magic did a stellar job with the CGI on this movie. I thought it was a great space opera following the hero's tale. Meryl Streep deserved the Oscar she won in this movie. And I especially like the scene where Dr. McCoy got to examine Jason. How much I know about this movie.
You had me for a while.
I thought you were using real character names until you said Dr. McCoy.
No, I haven't watched this movie in years and probably won't for years. I remember bits and pieces about it, but let's just call it what it is. To me, it doesn't even belong in the series.
Well, it kind of isn't in a way, because they do, once they go to Freddy versus Jason, they do return to current time. So it's like this is an outlier set in the future, but apparently he's still active in the present. So so time doesn't matter. He's an interdimensional, inter-time, whatever character, I guess.
It's teleportation, man.
Maybe he's Doctor Who. He has a TARDIS, so he just goes anywhere, anytime. Next one in the series is getting to a major point of silliness where we take characters from different movie franchises and pit them against each other. I think, which is normally reserved for comic book characters, but they decided to go in the horror direction this time and put Freddy in the same movie with Jason. I think it's enjoyable to watch for the most part, but I don't think the writing was very good, especially in terms of Freddy's dialogue. Like, he wasn't funny like he normally is. Whoever wrote it tried to be funny like Freddy normally was, but it just wasn't. It was like an amateur was writing his parts.
I've got to give this movie props for having, in my mind, the hottest final girl ever.
Yeah.
I can't remember the actress's name, but she's gorgeous.
Yeah,
one of her friends who gets killed early on. I can't remember her name either, but she was in Ginger Snaps. Also hot. I mean, maybe two of the more beautiful women ever to be in a Friday the 13th movie. So I got to give the movie props there.
Even more beautiful than Tommy is the final girl.
Oh, Tommy Jarvis.
Yeah.
Got to say they're two completely different franchises, and you know, as we saw, I remember when I was a kid. Okay, this is a horrible example, but it's the best I can come up with. When I was a kid, they had a crossover between Charlie's Angels and The Love Boat, and it drove me insane because The Love Boat is a comedy. It's a sitcom. It's got a laugh track. Charlie's Angels is a straight up action, cop show. You can't put those two together, and obviously not as egregious as that, but there's a difference in just tone between a Friday the 13th movie and a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. I don't know that those tones can ever meld well.
I agree with that assessment. I will say this. Going back to the Universal Monsters thing, this is what they were going for. I was pleasantly surprised when I saw this at the theater, just as a popcorn flick, not as a horror movie, not as anything else. It didn't bother me that much. I had fun. Let's just put it that way. And that's what I was supposed to do when I went in there. I wasn't supposed to be in a slasher film. I wasn't supposed to be scared. I guess maybe I was supposed to be scared, but no, it was just a fun flick for me.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that's kind of the point of most crossovers, but like Nehring pointed out, a lot of times they completely mismatch them. But I definitely wouldn't see any way to make a genuine scary horror movie by pitting two horror icons to fight each other, because neither one of them can die within their lore. So what's the point? I wanted to point out the final girl. Wasn't that Monica Keena?
Yes.
She's one of those girls who not only does she look great, but for some reason, her voice alone, I love the sound of her voice. I'm attracted even to just that. If she wasn't hot on the exterior, the voice would still do it for me. Of course, she has the most famous line of the movie. Anybody know what that is?
I'm blanking.
Right before she chops Freddy's head off, she says, "Welcome to my world, bitch."
Yeah, I do remember that now.
I feel like that was I haven't seen it in a while, so I don't know, but I feel like that was like a call and response, like maybe Freddy said, "Welcome to my world" earlier in the movie, because it sounds like something he would say.
Well, it kind of harkens back to that line from Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, where he smashes the girl into the television set and says, "Welcome to prime time, bitch."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that might even be what the reference was, the kind of like little, eye wink, snicker, like, "Hey, you remember from that movie?" That sort of thing.
The Jason in this movie, didn't you say, Nehring, that he was in part 8 as the chef in the diner?
I think you're right.
Did you know that, Michael?
His name?
Did you know that the guy that played Jason in Freddy vs. Jason was in Jason Takes Manhattan?
I did not know that.
Yeah, when he goes to the diner and walks through the diner, the guy he throws up against the mirror is the guy that plays Jason in Freddy versus Jason. I don't think they got along very well, him and King Hodder, from what I understand.
I don't think it either.
After doing 4 movies in a row, you kind of expect to be the guy from now on, and then suddenly they don't even call you for the next one.
Yeah, especially when Kane Hodder is going up against the other icon of Robert Englund that you would think have the decency to call him and let him play that role.
And the more tragic part of that is that the Kane Hodder actually played Freddy at the end of the final Friday.
Oh,
did you know that?
Was it his hand that came out of the?
Yes, it was his hand with the glove coming out of the ground.
Okay, I was not aware of that.
They let him play Freddy at the end of this movie under the assumption he was going to be in the next one against Freddy. One other thing I want to point out about this movie, something we pointed out in earlier movies, was that even though everybody cheers for Freddy when watching Nightmare on Elm Street movies, and everybody cheers for Jason when watching Friday the 13th movies, when I saw this, everybody was cheering for Jason the whole time.
I kind of got that feeling too.
Freddy, his lore is that he was actually a child molester. So, Jason, at least he's just a murderer, you know?
Yeah.
I barely even remember the remake.
I mean, I'm going to be in the same boat. Saw it in the theater, and I know I've seen it at least once on home video. I don't remember much about it. I know it was a soft reboot. So is it a sequel? Is it a remake? Kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of another. But I don't have much else to say about it.
I think it encompassed basically in one movie, parts 1, 2, and 3 to an extent. Yeah. As far as the timeline goes, if they show the mother getting killed, he's wearing the sack mask, and then he gets the hockey mask. I will say this, the dude that played Trent in that movie, Travis Van Winkle, is freaking hilarious in this.
He is good. He's good.
He is about the biggest jerk in every single Friday the 13th movies I've ever seen. So he plays a very good role in this.
And he reminded me a lot of a young Tom Cruise, too.
Yes. He looks almost exactly like him, except with blonde hair. Other than that, Derek Mears played a pretty good Jason as far as I'm concerned.
No complaints.
Brought him back to the human form that I liked from the originals. A lot of the decisions in that probably weren't decisions that I would have made, but who am I? I wouldn't have had him have underground trenches all around the camp.
Right.
I don't think Jason would ever take anyone hostage.
Yeah.
I don't see that happening. It was a serviceable movie. That's about as far as that goes.
I agree. It's just sort of there. It's not super, super good, but it's not super bad either. It's like a placeholder.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't remember really being into it, but I haven't seen it since probably it came out or maybe a few years after that. But one thing I remember being pointed out, not Tony's favorite, but Kane Hodder pointed out that the director of that movie, who literally told Derek Mears he wanted him to play Jason as Frankenstein. And that is one of the things that Kane Hodder said he didn't want when he was playing him.
And I would agree with Kane Hodder as Frankenstein.
Right.
I was about to say, it's kind of ironic that's Kane Hodder saying that, because Kane Hodder's performance really evokes Frankenstein.
Yeah. And whereas Derek Mears was running in this movie, he was a running Jason. He wasn't a walking Jason. No, and I don't want anybody to think I don't like Kane Hodder. I do like his portrayal of him. It's just, I'm not zombie Jason fan. That's my own.
Right.
I don't know if either one of you saw him, but check out some of the fan-made films while Friday the 13th is in legal battles right now. There's some good fan-made films on YouTube. Never Hike Alone, Never Hike in the Snow, Friday the 13th Vengeance. I believe that has Steve Dash in it. And it has CJ Graham playing Jason in that from part 6.
Oh.
Yeah, they're all on YouTube and they're free to watch. They're very well done for amateur filmmaking.
Well, I guess it's better than nothing, seeing as how the Friday the 13th movie rights had been bounced back and forth a million times over the years, and nobody can get them straight, so they can't actually make any official movies now.
This may go to the Supreme Court, from what I'm understanding.
Wow. Could you give a brief synopsis of what the situation is?
It's a battle between Sean Cunningham and Victor Miller, I believe, over the rights to the franchise.
Okay.
That's right.
So the two guys who basically birthed the franchise are fighting over it.
Yep.
That's it. In a nutshell.
easily just share the wealth.
Yeah, no kidding. I don't know why they wouldn't just decide that they both own it and, you can do some, I can do some, just make sure they're separated. Kind of like Night of the Living Dead. George and John Russo both decided they can both make movies under different names. And even though Russo didn't really do a lot of that, his idea really did give birth to the Return of the Living Dead movies, which I like the first couple of those. So
that was also a rights dispute. I think Romero took away the rights to the actual zombies, and Russo got the rights to the title Living Dead.
From there forward, George's movies were all of the dead. The Russo ones were of the living dead. So I don't know if that was part of the separation.
Yeah, Return of the Living Dead is probably the best zombie movie ever made, but that's for another podcast.
Yeah, I love that movie. It's one of my favorites. I believe we've gotten all of our Friday the 13th likes and dislikes out of our system at this point. Anybody else have anything else to say before we take off?
I don't think so.
No, I don't think so.
All right. Well, then, thank you to everybody out there who actually stuck through this whole thing. And hopefully you'll be back soon after you hit the subscribe button, and we will bring you more of this stuff. Until then, stay out of the lake.